Make no mistake, it is war. And Benjamin Netanyahu told you it was war. It is what it is, what it is. And the question is, how do we get here? And when does it end? To understand what's going on in Israel, you got to understand a bit of the TikTok. This came from the Wall Street Journal in a video that they put out.
At around 6:30 a.m., the attack began with a barrage of rockets. Shortly after the first reports of rocket fire, Hamas fighters entered Israel near the Kerem Shalom crossing, an important checkpoint between Israel and Gaza. The video released by Hamas shows its fighters breaching the border fence and attacking the military base there. Around the same time, Hamas fighters also raided and captured Israel's Erez border crossing station.
This came from two different locations. This came from the south and from the north of the Gaza Strip. This shows just by itself that there was a level of sophistication here, that this wasn't some fly-by-night attack, but rather this was well-planned and sadly well-executed. Speaking of executed, you have 800 Israelis and others who have been murdered. Never mind those who have been killed in the response from Israel in the Gaza Strip. Welcome to the show, presented by Americans for Prosperity, AmericansForProsperity.org. Economic liberty, free speech, that is what it's all about. This is Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army West Point graduate. He is our military expert. And Major, I want to get into the start of the conversation, which is this massive missile attack, this barrage, then the actual, what do you want to call it? Invasion into Israel, where over 260 people were murdered at a music festival. You had women kidnapped, children kidnapped. You haven't seen that since World War II. And then you had IDF soldiers killed. They weren't able to respond because they were overwhelmed and taken prisoner. This is a massive, massive failure. An incredible failure of the intelligence community in Israel. How in the world does this happen?
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me back. Yeah, it happens because 10 things go right for the Hamas side on that side of the terror side, and then 10 things go wrong on the Israeli side from a classic operation. And none of those linchpins were pulled out. What I mean by that is it's during a holiday. There was a holiday going on. Israel never thought that this would happen. The enemy wouldn't attack. And Israel doesn't ever thought that the enemy had this kind of capability. There's going to be investigations as to what happened and with regard to where they got the capability to do this. We haven't seen rockets fired from the Gaza Strip in over 2 years. They thought they had that under control because of that blockade. They had enough. They were able to mass enough people, men at the border. You know, they only used 1,000 troops here from a straight military, conflict. Israel would roll over 1,000 people attacking. But what they did was they attacked civilians, which just really didn't make it a military, kind of confrontation. It made it more of a terrorist operation. So, so many things went wrong on Israel's side. So many things went right on Hamas side. And that's where we have the result. And now it's on. But I'll tell you this: I think Hamas is dead people walking. I don't see them surviving any of this. I think the Israelis have activated 100,000 troops. We're going to see an incredible amount of destruction taking place in the Gaza Strip.
We'll get to that in a moment, Major. Let's take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
The number of missiles, which there isn't an official count of that I've seen yet, that were able to be launched. The sources state that these missiles were not shipped in, but rather were assembled in the Gaza Strip. That means a tremendous amount of materials was able to get in, whether that's from the Mediterranean or up through the Sinai via Egypt, if you will, or in other ways.
Yeah,
that all missed Israeli intelligence. That would tell me that multiple people were asleep at the switch. If you just said that they wouldn't have expected an attack on a Jewish holiday, it was a holiday called Simchas Torah yesterday, the other day over the weekend. That is a lot of asleep at the switch, not only for a day, but for months, if not years. No?
Yeah, so here's the kind of rockets that were used. They were short-range rockets, and they were the kind that they deploy in mass that overwhelm the Israelis' Iron Dome system. So that's number one. So those rockets are small, and they have small components to them, and that's why they were easily able to be smuggled into the country and then reassembled later. So, this was well planned, took place. Likely they started planning this 18 months ago. And maybe pinpointed it to the 1973 anniversary as well, 50 years to the date. That's always symbolic for these kinds of terrorist organizations. But yeah, well planned, and how it slips through is because things don't look like rockets given the size of the kind that they used here. They were deployed so close, they got them so close to that border there. By the time we're in the air, the Iron Dome system couldn't respond. And then, like any air defense platform, it can be overwhelmed.
You make the argument that any of these platforms can be overwhelmed, but this is about Iron Dome. So this means that Hamas has been able to study how the dome has been utilized, which is basically this missile system that shoots down Hamas rockets or Hezbollah rockets before they're able to land. They're able to study and figure out where the damage point is. They figured they learned that you can overwhelm this. When did that become part of what they were able to ascertain?
Well, it's just a math equation. If there's only X amount of pod rockets that are inside an Iron Dome system. Iron Dome works because it goes after areas of rockets, assuming coming in in the same space, blows up in space, and then takes out, let's say 10 to 15 rockets at one time before they land. But if you launch, 3,000 of them, or you launch, in the thousands of them, that's just too difficult for you in order to be defending against, especially if they come in waves, which is what they did there as well. Israel always knew that Iron Dome could be overwhelmed. It gets down to it's somewhat of a false sense of security, and then you lay over the fact that these were shorter range from a reaction perspective. They flew at a lower altitude. All the things that made it easier. It's a gap, lack of creativity. Same things that happened to the United States 22 years ago in 9/11, when we thought we were safe, and we never thought an enemy could use our airlines against us, and then didn't catch all of the indicators that this was happening. It's the same thing. Israel's going to go back and study all the things that they should have picked up beforehand. They'll never make that mistake again.
Talking to Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army. We talk about the Israeli military, Israeli intelligence missing this. And certainly there's a political reality that now exists for Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister. Was the United States in any way aware of this attack? Was there anything that was going on in previous reporting that you have seen that would be able to be tied to what it is we saw over the weekend and what is continuing?
I don't think so. I've not seen anything that we've reported on, and I would say that it would have been difficult for us to. And that's because this kind of attack would have fallen below a U.S. radar with regard to what connecting all the dots. Once again, they would have never thought, just like the Israelis, that they could have smuggled in those kind of smaller rockets. Lack of creativity, didn't think they were going to use those kind of rockets. They didn't see any kind of massing at the border. They did understand that there was a training exercise that they had set up, and they had trained on at some level for this. But that happens all the time. You see those, you go back to the late 90s, those videos of the guys with AK-47s jumping around on the monkey bars. I mean, so that's all part of their propaganda for their people. But they never connected the dot and in terms of where they attacked. And they attacked at the weak point in the north and the weak point at the south. So it likely flew below U.S. intel noise radar for saying, hey, something's going on here.
The weak point. Let's take a look. Just by the way, here's the map. You take a look at this. That is Gaza right there on the Mediterranean, bordering with Egypt. There in that Rafah area, which is to the south, that's where one of the checkpoints was. And then at the very, very north, that's where the other checkpoint was. That's where two of these major attacks came from, and the series of small towns that were hit and attacked. What's different here is that the objective of Hamas was not just to saber rattle. It was to destroy and it was to collect prisoners so they can engage a massive prisoner swap with Israel. As a matter of tactic, Major Lyons, this is a shift for sure.
Yeah, and they likely learned from what the United States did with the Iranians, creating that trading money for our American hostages. I think that factored into their equation as well. But the bottom line is Israel is no longer going to play with this. I mean, they're recognizing now that Hamas is out for the destruction of Israel now in a big way. I think this is going to mobilize. This is a linchpin. It's a tipping point. Pick your term. It's going to change the course of history with regard to what Israel's going to do. I don't think they're going to stop. They're not letting Hamas back in. The collateral damage, unfortunately, could be some of those Israeli citizens, which I'm sure they will do everything to try to rescue as a one-off. That, from a military perspective, that's probably the most difficult mission. Their equivalent of JSOC, their highly specialized Joint Operations Command. They're clearing their desks right now, figuring out how they go and rescue each of those hostages, probably one at a time. And if I know the state of Israel, they're going to try to do that.
Now let's dig into this response as you're discussing it. First, you have actual hostages that need to be rescued. Then what does one do about Hamas and the whole of Gaza? Then it's a conversation of Iran. And then it's a conversation of how nations like Egypt and Jordan and others respond. This all is in the backdrop of the idea that Israel was going to sign this pact with Saudi Arabia, as we've seen other nations vis-a-vis the Abraham Accords, and it was going to create a tighter relationship. You certainly have Iran questioning this in terms of a Sunni Shia conversation. Talk to me about this Israel deal with Saudi Arabia and whether you think that had an impact on this attack happening now.
I think you're onto something, Tony. But I think it had it at 50,000 feet and not at the tactical level. I think Hamas it's an attack dog. It's a tactic. It's the Irish Republican Army. It's an arm. War with an extension of foreign policy. They're the attack dog to this. I think it all comes from Iran, and it frankly is a Shia-Sunni divide that has existed since 9/11 and in some different ways as some of those, the Sunni countries have become more aligned towards Israel. The difference between this and 1973 is when Israel was attacked to the north and the south, the Syrian military rolled tanks to the north and the Golan Heights, and the Egyptians rolled them across the Gaza Strip in the south. Those days are over. There's nobody coming to the side of the Palestinians here. It's not happening. The Hamas soldiers, that's it, which is why they're done. So this is potentially that signal. I think the next question really is, does Israel use this to attack Iran, to take out their nuclear capability? Right? You go back to 1981 in Osirik, the Israelis had enough with the Iraqis. They decided to blow up their nuclear capability and set them back forever. This is what this is about. This is about Saudi Arabia eventually getting nuclear capability. The Iranians don't want that to happen, so that's why their fingerprints are all over this.
So in the response from Israel, I go back to what it is that it can be. It is about trying to rescue as many hostages as you can.
Yeah.
And there have already been reports of some rescued. Then there is what you do about Hamas and how that's going to affect Gaza. And then there is Iran. So let's now discuss the idea of Hamas itself. You made the point early on in this conversation, talking to Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army, that Hamas is dead man walking. Give me a detailed, down to the crossing the I's and dotting the T's.
Yeah.
What that means to you.
Yeah. So every single facility, every single area that they know that Hamas operates out of is going to get flattened. That's going to go. I mean, you already saw it already. And the collateral damage will be irrelevant to the Israelis because they're no longer going to just target combatants. They'll do what they can on some level. I went to a briefing over the weekend actually about this kind of warfare that's being done right now in this century with this enemy that decides to intermingle with civilians and hide behind them. And the one thing the United States has learned is protecting the force is the number one priority. Well, that's the Israelis the same way. They're going to protect their force and they're going to protect their people. So there's going to be the backlash is coming, but they don't care. They're going to, if you're a direct link to the second independent relative of a person who helped Hamas at some point, you're on the list. So pack your bags because there's something coming your way in order to stop it. And again, think Taliban in Afghanistan in 2002 as the United States military took over Afghanistan and got rid of that government. That's what's going to happen here. There's going to be a way that they're going to have to do re-elections. I think so. I mean, sure. Yeah, Israel. So Israel gives up in 2005. I think they've recognized that they've got to go back.
But does going back mean killing every Hamas fighter, and that's going to include some innocent civilians, and wiping Gaza clean of Hamas and saying Gaza belongs to Israel, Gaza is Israel, and that's it. It's over. No more Palestinian anything, no more two-state solution anything. Yeah. The Jordanians can take you back. Egypt can take you. We're done here. That, to me, is the cleaning house conversation. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that. They're not saying that out loud right now, because that sparks the outrage that we always see that happens against Israel. That's what brings up the things. But I do think that that's one of their end games. Israel's always look at their geography, right? Look at what they've always had this challenge. I thought it was going to happen, more in the West Bank than it happened in Gaza, frankly. You concentrate forces in that middle part of the West Bank in Israel, and you divide Israel in half, and classic military maneuver, divide and conquer. So again, Hamas kind of blows it on some level because they shot this wad right now with regard to this one big attack, killing what they've done. But now that it's over. And now you're going to see the thing tip well back in the back of the favor of the Israelis. So that's why I do think that eventually you're going to see Israel take back control of Gaza. I think that's what's going to eventually mean. They're not saying that out loud right now, though.
One of the big questions that has been asked, Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army, did the $6 billion matter? The $6 billion that was part of the prisoner swap that Joe Biden allowed to be unfrozen. Remember, it wasn't a check written by the United States. It was unfrozen funds.
Yep.
And you'll see a lot of people on my side of the aisle. This is because Biden gave them the $6 billion. Biden has funded the war on terrorism. Now, the $6 billion could very well be used for that. I believe it will be used for that. This seems to have been long in the planning. The Wall Street Journal reporting that as well. This $6 billion, is it fair to say this was used in this attack?
Probably not fair to be used in this attack, but it puts $6 billion in the bank for future operations. I think the $4 billion that the Obama administration had a lot more to do with this attack than that $6 billion. I think there's a lot of fingerprints of the Obama administration on that deal, on the $6 billion deal. I mean, look, the Obama administration, that they wanted that Iran deal to be the legacy of a Barack Obama. You and I have talked. I believe the biggest foreign policy failure in our country in our lifetime post World War II has been Iran, and Barack Obama wanted to solve that. But the Iranian nuclear deal, all it did was kick the problem down the road 10 years when he would have been out of office and dead or something, maybe. So I do think that had a lot to do with it. But now they have $6 billion in the bank for future operations. Now, whether the Iranians deploy that to Hamas or Hezbollah or some other terrorist organization that they're going to fund remains to be seen. But they got a $6 billion payday.
They'll all tell you, no, it went through humanitarian channels and the Iranians don't get the money directly. Anybody who believes that is rather foolhardy.
Yeah.
When looking at what Hamas has done, and it's, of course, Iran chanting its standard death to America, death to Israel, Hamas saying that they are not done. One of the questions here is we've taken a look at the open border there on the southern border, or the porous border, I should say, if not open.
Yeah.
And one questions whether or not the U.S. is next. Is there fear that there is going to be an attack of some kind in the United States via Hamas and Iran?
Well, I don't want to be an alarmist. I want to go that route. But if this is not a wake-up call for us about our border, I don't know what is. Because if you want to have a country, you have to have a border. And that's just no other way around it. Now, whether they could infiltrate the way they did like this with 1,000 people, they could create damage. It eventually would be stopped. But it would create uncertainty to our government. It's just what the downstream attack would be. It wouldn't, threaten the sovereignty of the United States. It wouldn't threaten our democracy, but it would expose us, and it would make us feel that we were exposed. So wake up call for administration to do something about our border, watching people coming through it. They couldn't mass this equipment. They couldn't mass the kind of military things that it would be, but they could create a situation where that some people were killed along the border, and then who knows what happens next.
Major Mike Lyons, retired United States Army. I always appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And I thank you for being with us as well, being a part of this. We've got more videos coming. Certainly everything we're doing on radio. Make sure you're subscribed here on Rumble. My thanks to Americans for Prosperity, AmericansForProsperity.org, economic liberty, free speech. That is where it's at. Find the chapter in your state, AmericansForProsperity.org. And I will catch you very soon. Take care.